We saw Marjorie Taylor Greene buy that dip. I got one question for her. How much did you make? How much did you make off of people's despair? How much did you make off that panic? How much did you make off of that suffering? No more. We can't accept it.
We are back with the big deal. That was New York Democratic Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez earlier this week, calling out her colleague, Marjorie Taylor Greene. This week, Greene, a Republican representative from Georgia, disclosed that she purchased thousands of dollars in stock ahead of the president's pause on tariffs. The timing of those trades was good for Greene. Trump's pause triggered a massive spike in stock prices minutes after it was announced. But Marjorie Taylor Greene is not the first lawmaker to turn advanced knowledge of policy changes into thousands or even millions of dollars. In March of 2020, at the start of the coronavirus pandemic, dozens of members of Congress, about equally split between Democratic and Republican members, quickly bought and sold nearly $100 million worth of personal stock after receiving briefings on the massive impact that COVID would have on the economy. Here's another example. Last year, the husband of former Democratic Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi sold $500,000 worth of stock in the credit card company Visa right before the Department of Justice announced an antitrust lawsuit against the company, avoiding what would have been a big financial loss. And one former Republican representative, Chris Collins of New York, even ended up in federal prison for insider trading. Collins was caught on video calling family members, warning them to dump stock in a drug company after learning in advance that the company's tests of a new experimental drug had failed. Collins was eventually pardoned by President Trump in 2020. Now, incredibly, stock trading by members of Congress based on advanced knowledge about pending government action is actually legal. And it's done so frequently that there are Wall Street companies that follow and summarize and promote the trading activity of lawmakers so that other investors can try to match their gains. In one case, the disclosure that Pelosi bought stock in a small tech company brought in a surge of copycat investors and caused the stock price to increase by 35%. Reformers are saying that enough is enough, and they're pushing for a ban on stock trading by members of Congress. Joining me now with more on all of this is Kedric Payne, the Vice President and Senior Director of Ethics at the Campaign Legal Center and Ethics Watchdog Group. Mr. Payne, thanks for joining us. And now, studies show that members of Congress pretty consistently get better returns from their stock purchases than the average Wall Street trader or the analysts who give out investment advice for a living. Are we electing financial wizards, or are these lawmakers profiting off of insider information?
It looks like it's very hard to know what's going on, because if you have members of Congress who are having these returns that are far greater than what is expected, it is only common sense for the American public to question what's going on. And that's what the real problem is that there is a perception that insider trading is going on. And even if you don't know whether or not that's happening, the mere appearance of it happening diminishes public trust in government.
Yeah, you wrote a report that I referenced about what happened when the pandemic hit in 2020. Members of Congress walked out of confidential and sometimes classified briefings about what was about to happen, and then they used that knowledge to buy stock in companies that enable remote work or make medical ventilators, and they sold off their stock holdings in restaurants and hotels. Explain what is wrong with that. What harm does it cause the public when lawmakers are behaving that way?
The pandemic is a perfect example to show the harm that it causes. If you can take yourself back to that time in March and April of 2020, when everyone was focused on whether or not their local hospital would have enough ventilators in case they had to be rushed to the emergency room and couldn't breathe. And then at the same time, you had members of Congress investing in ventilators and in treatments without focusing on what needs to happen for my constituents, what needs to happen for the country. You end up with an American public that questions whether or not the elected officials have their interests at hand and are focusing on that, or are they just concerned with their stock portfolio?
A lot of my viewers are thinking, hey, there ought to be a law. So let's talk about the Stock Act, which your organization, the Campaign Legal Center, helped to get passed back in 2012. The law requires lawmakers to file financial disclosures of their trades within 30 days. And thanks to those reports, we can discover, although after the fact, which members are probably trading on advance notice about when regulations are being imposed or suspended, or new weapons systems being approved, or tariffs being paused, the kind of inside information that will clearly move the market. But obviously, mere disclosure has not put an end to this congressional trading. What else is needed, do you think?
Well, clearly what we need is a ban on congressional stock trading. Because if you simply disclose what is happening, you just are basically showing what the problem is without addressing that problem. And the end result is what you mentioned earlier, where there are people who are assuming that members of Congress are trading on improper information and therefore following their trade, such that the members of Congress become market movers and can't lose with their investments because they are going to be copied by other investors.
So a new report by your organization found that more than 60% of new members of Congress own stock, another 32% own investment funds. So that leaves only 7% of the freshman class who don't own anything on Wall Street. If there was a ban on stock trading, how would that work?
The way the ban on stock trading would work is that members of Congress would not be able to invest in individual stocks, that's of particular companies, because they have so much power that can direct the value of those companies as people who have oversight over these companies. They would, however, still be able to invest in those mutual funds or exchange traded funds, those investment vehicles that are focused on a large sector and a wide variety of companies, so they can be able to have investments. No one is saying that members of Congress should not be able to have savings that can grow and they can be able to retire like anyone else. However, the American people have the right to know that their members of Congress are not invested in individual companies and trying to profit over off of the confidential information that they are receiving.
What are the prospects of that kind of legislation getting passed by the current Congress?
By the current Congress, it's not very clear whether or not that legislation will pass. The good news is that there was bipartisan legislation that got very far in the Senate last year, and the hope is that this year, with the public attention on what is happening with stock trading now, that legislation will be revived and we will get some movement. But it really just comes down to the fact that the public has to just exercise their voice and let their members of Congress know that they do not want this type of activity going on.
All right. Thank you very much, Kedric Payne. Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.